And we are live. It's showtime. Welcome everyone. My name is Daniel, and today I will be the host of Tech Excellence Meetup together with my friends Alina and Oliver. I would say let's get started. Yeah, Tech Excellence. Our vision is to raise the bar of technical excellence across the world. Here are our organizer. First and foremost, Valentina Cupac, our founder and organizer. Next to her, we have Alina Liborkina, a co-organizer, and also, as you see, he's a host today. She's host today, and last but Oliver Ziller next to her, who is also a co-organizer, and of course Daniel Moka, which is me, another co-organizer and host today. Yeah, here are our speakers from the past. All of the events are recorded, and feel free to watch it on YouTube. And also for the next half year, we have already really good and exciting sessions planned. So stay tuned. Yeah, we can be found in a lot of platforms. For example, in Meetup, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, and last but not least on Discord. We have a vibrant and active community there to discuss things about technical excellence, so feel free to join. And big thanks to our sponsors, Optivem, and to partners, QE Unit. Yeah, technical excellence. Learn how to deliver quality software faster with us. All right, so today we have an amazing guest, Denis Čahuk. He's a technical coach. He helps teams regain their confidence in their development process and capabilities with just-in-time training on how to improve their delivery speeds and maintenance costs by exposing them to tactical agility, clean code, TDD, DDD, and event modeling. And the title of his session today is Domain-Driven Qualities of High-Performing Teams. So yeah, before I hand over the microphone, I would like to let you know that feel free to ask your question. Don't hesitate if you have any questions about the topic. At the end of this session, we are going to dedicate half an hour to address all your questions, and Denis will be happy to answer to all of them. So Denis, welcome. Thank you that you joined us. It's a pleasure to have you, and I would say good luck. The stage is yours.
Daniel, thank you. Everybody in the audience, thank you for joining us today. It's a lovely, hot summer evening, so all contingencies planned in case my graphics card overheats. We have something planned for to make sure the show keeps running. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. As Daniel mentioned, my agenda for today is pretty simple. I'm talking about high-performing teams. Specifically, why I chose domain-driven qualities. Domain-driven design seems to be the one thing that ties this all together. So what we'll be discussing today is very simple. I'm a software engineer, self-taught, college dropout. I worked in enterprises and startups. And the socio-technical sides of how teams work and what makes teams work well always eluded me. I read books, everybody knows what we should be doing, but there's always something missing. We always have an excuse not to do the right thing. And that was fascinating to me. Like, why do people behave this way? Maybe I shouldn't eat that, and maybe that's from a health perspective, that's easy to say and then go on a diet when you start having a problem. But I see that kind of behavior as well in software, especially on software teams, rather than just individuals. So I made it my mission to learn what makes a team execute well. Not just knowing how to do it, but what makes them do it. So this is a overall knowledge sharing from my side on what I learned, what I found to be in books, but in like 30, 40-year-old books like the one I have over here that are giving very sound advice, and for some reason we're not applying it. Like why that happens. I've seen many different industries. If any of these industries is very particular to you, anybody who is in the audience, feel free to shout out or to ask specific questions. If we have a question that is industry specific, I love that. As much nuance, as much detail as possible. If we can avoid any kind of MVC app to-do list kind of kata examples, I would be very grateful. So apart from me doing coaching now, I used to be in back-end engineering, mostly in the TypeScript, the more younger languages, let's say, the JavaScripts, the TypeScripts, the PHPs for a very long time. So that's sort of my stack. And I've been on a hiatus on self-development and life coaching, and then came back to the industry. My specialization, specifically, the one detail that you might not be aware of is I do just-in-time training. So I don't do workshops per se, but I come in onto a team that has an important project, and then I help them deliver on that project, rather than holding a workshop that is an isolated kata, and then once we're done, you have to figure out how to apply the workshop to the really important thing that you're working on. And if that's really difficult, then that makes the training really risky, and that's not how I work. So if you're decided to join us today, I'm just keeping the intro a bit longer because I know you like to take a little bit of coffee, or maybe if it's late for you, a little bit of dinner, and you just put the kids to bed. So the main meat starts in a few minutes. This talk is primarily for teams of software engineers, regardless of whether it's backend, front-end, mobile, enterprise. The tech leads of those teams, engineering managers who are managing ICs. So if you're a second line manager, you'll still get value from this. But if you're in a company that has 7 layers of management, perhaps not so much. But stick around, let me know. Specifically for stress management on when your product or your founder keeps changing their mind, and that causes a lot of friction, or whether the only way you're communicating around the roadmap is that you need to be busy all the time and that they want you to do estimates. And especially this talk is for you if you're just in engineering and you're constantly wearing your engineering excellence hat and you don't really understand how your product makes money. That is the reason that last point primarily is the reason why I use the term domain-driven qualities of high-performing teams. Because in domain-driven design, we talk specifically about the core domain, the core business domain of why you specifically are being paid to develop software. You're not doing it for free. Or if you are, then you're doing it for open source. There's a higher mission, and maybe you are looking for a sponsor. And that is still a high mission where you're customer-centric and you have a specific domain. Who this is not for. So I do a lot of things value priced. I offer my services in a fixed cost model, because I know that if I speed a team up, if they end up being paid hourly, if they work very fast and they're not aware, or they have imposter syndrome and charge less than what they should, then if I speed you up significantly, you'll make less money. You'll be able to take on more clients, but by taking on more clients, you'll just make what you would be making by working slowly for one client. Do the math, it checks out. So specifically, this is for companies, teams that have a product, perhaps customer-facing or platform-facing side of their domain. This isn't so much for you where if you're an agency and you have thousands of engineers, but you're serving 200 of clients with 5 developers each, and perhaps you're doing nearshoring, offshoring, staff augmentation. So you can still derive some value from it, but unfortunately, you're not the main focus of the talk. So there will be things that are perhaps seemingly working for you, but I'm addressing them as a bad habit. So if you stick around, I made sure to give value on this as soon as possible. If you're not going to stick around, there's a slide with a fox. If you find the fox, you will get the important slide. If you're watching a transcript of this, you can zoom forward through the previews of if you're watching it on YouTube and find the fox, and that'll get you the main table of contents, and it will help you navigate if you're more of a magician archetype and you like to figure out things on your own. So I made that part fun for you. If you're not gonna watch this, if you're gonna drop off here now because the kids woke up and they're screaming, and you say that you'll watch it later, but really you won't. What I can recommend is asking the 5 whys, understand why you're doing, question everything, understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, why that needs to be done that way, and learn to have a conversation using the 5 whys. If you Google, YouTube, learn the 5 whys, the 5 why questions, that will be, if that is the only value you derive from today, I think that that's going to help you a lot. But if you're in for the full meal, then grab some water. Do say hello in chat. I am watching. Although there's a small delay, I have to say. We can't have a live conversation, unfortunately. And let's jump in. So, before we start, I have to say this because usually I get in trouble for this. People ask me, yeah, Denis, but just tell me the easy thing of how to fix stuff. How do I avoid that difficult conversation with my boss? Well, unfortunately, just like with workout, just like with health, just like with anything challenging in your life, there is no substitute for doing the work. So if the thing you're avoiding and you want a better strategy for is how to build a better relationship with your manager, or how to communicate with somebody that's micromanaging you, well, that's the hard part. And there's no way around that. It's just that we can make it easier or more inspiring for you to do so, but there's no easy way out. There's no machine. Unfortunately, ChatGPT is not smart enough yet to impersonate you and have that conversation in your stead. And I think it will be hallucinating a lot if it did. So that's a disclaimer, because people usually ask me about how to get distracted, not so much how to get the main workout. So for context, this is about how to do the hard stuff and how to do it without being overwhelmed. So think of it like going to the gym, but you've never been there before, and you just want to take it slow, rather than taking a pill. This is not about taking pills. The structure for today is pretty loose. I have 2 main topics, or let's say formats of discussion. The next few slides are going to be topics of, let's say, values. I would say values in the broad meaning of the sense of a company, an organization, or just a team, or your individual values if they apply to you. Usually there's an overlap, but it's not perfect. So in those values, there are usually anti-patterns. People who say, yeah, we really value customer obsession, but then they're not really following through on that. Or somebody might say, we really value quality, but then they're not really doing the work to putting quality into the software. Maybe they're just inspecting it and they say, well, it's the best we could do. So we're going to talk and compare how a, let's say, default team that's on autopilot might be doing things benevolently but badly, that may lead to low performance, and compare that with, let's say, the most benevolent form of doing the hard work of like medium to high investment for a team that performs really well. I do need to mention this though, because I do get asked a lot about, what are those teams that I worked on? And you can check my LinkedIn CV for that. You can check what teams I worked on. What really worked well for me is that I happened to be lucky in that I worked in startups where the company disbanded because of poor choices, but the team stayed together. So we essentially job hopped, as is popular in the industry, but we hopped together as a team. So even though the company failed, the business pivoted, the team kept the lessons and it kept growing. And I was lucky being caught in that wave. So that's where most of my hands-on learning experiences came from. And I see that that's a problem for a lot of young engineers, especially with the developer survey from Stack Overflow coming out now. Most developers are self-taught college dropouts like myself, who are working with an inexperienced team and have never seen a good project, but more on that later. The second part will be team-wide accelerators. So part the anti-patterns and qualities, I will speak about the good and the bad, contrasted. Good, good cop, bad cop, low performance, high performance. The second part is how to communicate, how to take accountability when the other parts of the organization outside of the team are not cooperating. What you can do to ask for help, what you can do to get them on your side, to accelerate the team's success from the outside in. It's essentially how to get collaboration from your other business stakeholders, especially if there's friction in the relationships or there's siloed departments, etc. After that, we will kick off with a live Q&A. If you have any questions now, we will address them then. If you sent me anything on my email, I will check it then. So if there's still time to let me know. Otherwise, let's start with the first qualities. The first thing I want to talk about is about the quality of attachment. I see this a lot. I'm primarily a coach. So I used to be a developer and then a trainer, and now I'm a coach. So when I did training, I did DDD workshops or DDD workshops or event storming workshops. But I started noticing that what the main thing that got in the way is people's egos. And nowadays, this didn't used to be the case, but nowadays I see a lot of mentions of in job descriptions of please no egos. We want to put the company first. We want team players. And that's a very broad term because sometimes you should think about yourself, especially when it comes to your health. You should be thinking about yourself. You should put your health first. The annoying thing I think that we can all agree on is that annoys us about egos is attachment. It's like when I say, I coded this is mine. I don't like when you touch it. Or I don't like when you touch it, but I don't agree with how you made your changes. Definitely the first anti-pattern to look for in let's say, a team that is an autopilot, or a team that might be creating socio-technical, interrelational, interdepartment friction, is when individuals start, vetoing notions or ideas because they don't like it. The best ideas should win. And the best ideas are usually those that serve the customer. And perhaps not even the customer. If you're working on a value stream, if using team topologies terminology here, if you're working on a value stream project, then sure, that's a value stream for a department, a customer, etc. But it can also just be value to the other engineers on your team or developer experience. Maybe it's just communicating benevolently with your manager. Right? So it's really important to not get attached to the thing that you produce, the code. The moment you check out code, the moment you commit code, that's the company's code or the team's code. It's very important to keep your attachment to, oh, I'm important because I did these keyboard strokes, to a minimum. Sometimes it's hard, but it can definitely get in the way because it fosters bad habits. And the bad habit is usually not accepting challenges. Interviewing a lot of engineers, I often see this in particular, overwork. In implementing lean software development, the book by Mari and Tom Papanek, they really like using this terminology of inventory. Inventory, wasted inventory. It's like overproduced inventory. When we agree to a plan, this is where we headed, and it's too early. This is especially, I worked primarily in the Balkans, and on the Balkans, usually when we saw this idea of not having a plan as a sign of incompetence. Whereas, reading the Agile Manifesto, reading the Scrum Handbook, any kind of modern software and architecture and software engineering handbook seems to suggest doing important decisions as late as possible. So this is always weird to me, because sometimes your product people or your co-founder or your CFO, I don't know, wants to do a budget plan or wants to do a business roadmap or a product roadmap or a feature roadmap or a release roadmap, and they want certainty. And you can only give good estimates and good certainty if what you're producing is a commodity. And if what you're not, if what you're producing is not a commodity, it's custom software, perhaps even custom software that you don't know how to build, it's very important that you don't commit to a overly eager long-term initial plan, because that's waterfall. There's nothing wrong with waterfall. It's just that waterfall usually comes with a very expensive, very detailed upfront design. Waterfall is not a bad thing if you do the upfront design. A problem is when you do very little planning, very little design, and then do waterfall. Or the dark derivatives of agile, dark agile, heard the term scrum fall, which was essentially interdepartment scrum. So try to accept the challenges of saying, I don't know. Of saying, I don't know, but this is what I'm gonna do to create knowledge. This is what I'm going to do to get the bad news of what could really hurt us if we get it wrong as early as possible in the project. If you don't do that, you've probably been on a project like that before. I won't go into detail into that. If you have an interesting story, I would love to at least read about it in the comments. But if you want, we can also discuss it. The next thing that follows, I'm coaching a lot of teams, and usually the problem is inter-department sharing of something. I love when they use this word sharing, because to me, sharing, things like responsibility or a budget or resources, people, like resources, calling them resources between departments, it's like a bad divorce. It's like I have the kids on every other day, and then you have them on this day, and then this weekend is mine. And I see this often in teams where the engineering department is divorced from the product department, where the ticket is either in one place or the other, where the engineering department doesn't work hand in hand with the product, where the product department doesn't accept unknowable facts from the engineering department, and sort of forces down this need for certainty. Again, that is usually an ego problem. It's like, I need to, in order to be a good product owner, in order to be a good founder, in order to be a respectable CTO, I need to know exact dates on everything. I require certainty. If the person you're talking to as a team lead, or if your team is often having planning sessions where you're reporting to such a person, this usually comes up, where you're really sharing responsibility, one at a time. It goes to this department and that department, which usually, again, is a sign of scrum fall, waterfall, or just the CFO running the company, essentially. And the engineering department is a cost center. What I've seen work really well on the coaching that I do with these kinds of teams is that this is usually a micromanagement response about lack of transparency, lack of communication. Like somebody is using some tool to avoid talking to somebody they don't like. And then that mixes up the accountabilities, the responsibilities of various features or even components, microservices, like regardless of what you're using, what's fashionable in your company. This I see everywhere. And this is a very simple solution. But not if you're not aware of it, and not if you think this is a too hard step for you to undertake at this company to even be worth considering the stress or the energy or the effort required to address it, in addition to you doing your normal work in coding and in management and design and UX, testing, QA. What I see work really well in high-performing teams is that teams are allowed to be dynamic. So when somebody is needed, they would mob program or pair program with the person that is accountable. So if a UX designer or a product owner requires quick feedback on something, rather than handing off the deliverable, you invite them into the team and sort of sit down with you or huddle. Nowadays with remote work, huddle on Slack or on Teams and just do it side by side and see it being shaped. rather than handing it off, to foster as much interdepartment transparency as possible. This one gets me every time, and it makes me sad. There isn't much to be said here. If you know that you're gonna polish something, if you know that you're not gonna get it right the first time, so if you haven't done that big upfront design, you will likely iterate on anything that is important to the business. Now, you might not know what is important to the business at the beginning of the project if you haven't done your homework, but I've seen a high-performing team plan this kind of iteration where they say, well, we'll just release version 1. And I know that until the deadline, you will probably want to make a few changes or iterations on this. So let's plan that into the release roadmap. Whereas a low-performing team or like a default team, the anti-pattern that I see them follow usually, that they call me for coaching for, is they have 10 people on the team, and the 10 people are working on essentially 10 separate parallel streams of work, because somebody thought that nobody should, anything but done. Any engineer not doing anything or not having unplanned time is a waste of resources. That's usually cost-centered thinking. But unfortunately, it creates a lot of waste, and that waste is then creating technical debt. And that technical debt, if it is willingly created, requires either friction in somebody has to have a hard conversation, or it is not willingly taken on, technical debt, and then that causes unknowable friction because the team isn't aware that's there, so they give overly optimistic estimates, and then it's just everything is slower as it should be, and they can never celebrate. So even when they release, they're late, so nobody's happy about them getting to the finish line. This one I want to touch on briefly. An anti-pattern I see a lot is when a team says, hey, testing is important to us, but then they cut on the amount of time they invest into testing. Because if you've done any real introspection into you as a person, like if you just look at you, the audience, your own personal values, everything that is important for you in life, that's where most of your money goes. If you value fast cars, you probably have an expensive car. If you value having a good computer, you probably have an expensive good computer. If you value gaming, then you probably have a very expensive gaming rig. If you like gadgets, you probably have the most expensive gadgets you can buy. The same goes for tech teams. Whatever you value the most should cost you. If you communicate, a team following an anti-pattern of low performance will communicate, oh, this is important to us, but we won't do it if it's too expensive. We won't do it if it takes too much time. And I see a lot of teams behave this way because their values are a wish list, not something that they embody. And this goes back to the original disclaimer. There is no substitute for doing the work. And what I saw from the developer survey from Stack Overflow for 2023, the results, is that a lot of engineers seem to think that quality and upholding core professional craft and software business values, they seem to think that they are optional. And usually when these things are being skipped, bad things happen on a project. Let's continue on the next one, which is priorities. You've seen this countless times. I don't have to. This one hurts. Like in the gut, this is where most people go, okay, yes, this is the thing where Denis rambles about. Are you following the sprint goal or not? Like, if you're using Jira, do your sprints have a sprint goal or not? Do you even know that there's a sprint goal text box that unfortunately is optional? Priorities aren't so much about what's important. Priorities should always communicate what outcome is next. It shouldn't be task focused. I see a lot of teams work very diligently, going really fast in the wrong direction. And then the reaction to that is usually coming back really fast or even faster, because now they think they have to make up for the wrong distance that they went through, rather than simply accepting that their outcomes are what matter. If we've gone down the wrong direction, then that is a lesson, if we act upon it, that we have discovered something that doesn't work, and then we move on. But if we act upon it, we are closer to the outcome, because now we know, okay, this is definitely the wrong direction. We document this and never make this mistake again. It's a very mature way of looking at it. But a lot of teams simply do the mistake and try to brush it under the rug, or try to ignore it, or maybe don't even have retrospectives. A lot of teams that I see following Scrum or Agile or any kind of weird Agile manifesto-ish kind of custom workflow is they don't really do retrospectives, or they don't even do root cause analysis. Like, what made us assume that going this direction is okay? Well, usually you go the wrong direction to create knowledge. We're going to talk more about that later. On the topic of priorities, my personal caveat is, if you're in the business of building roadmaps and communicating priorities, you should encourage changing those priorities and sharing that document to anybody who has enough information to change the course of those priorities, to keep that document updated, rather than trying to rigidly, create a roadmap once per quarter and then try to rigidly cram everything into that. That definitely puts you on the left side of this slide. We touched on commodities earlier. When I said, if you want certainty, then the only certain thing you can deliver is a commodity, if that is the highest absolute value that you have. What I see a lot of engineers struggle with is they're not really sure whether the advice they are giving is good or bad. They just see it's fashionable. And I see this a lot every 5 years or so. First it was the whole data binding thing, then it was MVC, MVP, MVCC, MVVC, then it was Docker and Kubernetes, and let's do Docker and Kubernetes for then microservices came in, then there was service-oriented architecture just a few years before microservices, and now the edge everything, cloud everything, and Kafka everything, and event source everything, and CQRS everything. If you check out the developer survey of Stack Overflow, again, I'm mentioning it, it might surprise you that a lot of successful business, like most of the businesses, software businesses in software, can be built using a few technologies. Most businesses can be built using an application server, a database like MySQL and Postgres, and Redis. Redis is super powerful. I've been in the industry nearly 20 years. I still do Redis tutorials because they introduce new features to Redis every few years that are really, making it a Swiss Army knife in your toolbox. You can use it as a message queue, as a cache, as an intermediary, you can use it for Bloom filters. You can use it as a event sourcing store, but just temporarily. You can use it for JSON object manipulation. It's really powerful. But unfortunately, that's often not fun. And if you don't have an entrepreneurial drive, you might want to invest that sort of magician archetype as a developer into playing around with new, expensive, exotic tools, rather than exploring new business ideas. See, a very good domain-focused team tries to figure out, okay, what is a new thing that we can build for the business to create more value? Whereas a sort of lethargic default team is busy with, well, I'm stressed out about this last feature that we built because we're behind schedule. I just want some downtime so I can write some tests and play with Kafka. Right? And unfortunately, this is a yearning for growth, but it's being invested into the wrong direction, because the growth is usually happening on the challenges that happen on that important project that's using old, boring technologies. And those challenges are usually connected with relationships with your manager, with other teams, with your customers. What's the last time you spoke to a customer? Do you know how you make money? Is your software commodity software, or have you custom built it? Is there something really important about it? These are important things that your team should know. The next one is always, we like measuring things, okay? I've been guilty of this plenty of times, and one of the most shocking things I do when I'm coaching teams is cancel a sprint. Because they might. So when I talk about measurements, I specifically refer to this idea of using any kind of agile methodology to structurally and habitually put a boring process onto the calendar, rather than keeping it dynamic. Because a lot of teams, especially on the left side of this diagram, they just use Agile or Scrum to have a structural, repetitive cadence to their meetings. They're not really doing it to discuss building a new product and then, oh, we need a new meet. We definitely need a meeting on Thursday, and then we're releasing on Tuesday, and then we have a 2-day sprint, a 2.5-day sprint, or then we have a 2-week sprint because we're building something more complex. It's just this click, clock, sort of rigid. This is how long a unit of work should be. The problem is when you start measuring that, it gives you this clockwork sense of motion, gives you the illusion that it is measurable, that you can measure velocity on a calendar, that you can measure some kind of technical depth, or let's do this later, or at the beginning, or at the end. This usually happens with teams that say, oh, we have so much work, our sprints should be 2 weeks. Or when there's this batch thinking of, oh, we're not going to release every day. We're not going to get feedback quickly. I'm not going to focus on releasing as soon as possible. Let's just batch everything together into as big as a batch as possible, and hopefully that will work out. Because usually what you want is continuous delivery in some form. As the industry matured, we saw that just shortening the feedback lifecycle, the feedback round trip, the feedback length, the time it takes for us to get feedback from real customers, is the primary driver of productivity. So when you're putting something onto a feature branch, to isolate yourself, to not break anything else, so that you can perfectly measure and inspect it in isolation on staging, or that QA can run some tests on it and then you can merge it. That's trying to inspect quality into the system with some rigid structure. But usually my experience has been, if you do have a sprint, it's best to have them not as a multiple of a week. So something like 2.5 days or 3 days, so that the team is constantly planning, okay, when should we release something big or announce something big, or when should we next plan? If you are using sprints and your sprint planning sessions are recurring every Monday from now until 2047, there's probably a problem, because that might take away a lot of flexibility, and you might be leaving a lot of productivity on the table. Remember, it's a sprint, not a marathon. You're supposed to tackle one idea and deliver just that as a team, and then move on. And you don't need to do the sprints back to back either. That's awesome one. One very, very controversial thing that we do with teams is that sometimes we just do a sprint and then analyze, talk to customers, and then just not have a sprint for 2 days, do some support, or don't have an offsite, or do requirements gathering or requirements refinement, and then have another sprint. It doesn't have to be back to back. Back to back is usually a sign of a cost center, of an engineering department that's being overly squeezed for productivity, which produces exactly the opposite. This is more the tactical side. Today it's mostly socio-technical, but definitely what I see a lot of engineers get into is, if you're trying to avoid doing the hard work of improving yourself, or improving your relationships with your manager, with your team, with your business co-founders, with your subject matter experts, that's what domain-driven design is all about. That's what event storming is all about. The tactical toys are a really good distraction. the design patterns, the systems design, the CQRS, the event buses, the microservices, the shiny new toys, and especially creating speculative abstractions for some unknown future system. It's like, oh, maybe we'll need that. Well, you probably won't. A good team, an experienced team that works very fast, is just barely putting in enough infrastructure to serve what they need today. And if they have a plan, for the next iteration, which ideally is less than a week, perhaps include that in. But if you're over-architecting for something that will happen in 6 years, that's definitely a sign that you're baking in product depth into the system, into your code, before you've even launched. So an anti-pattern I see a lot is speculative abstractions. It's like, oh, we will probably use this for some other thing later, so I'll just create the abstraction now. TDD helps with this a lot. TDD really holds you accountable to not doing this. But I have seen people say, okay, well, duplicate it, and then when you see it the third time, then you can deduplicate. That's also anti-pattern. I don't want to go into that specifically, into too much detail. Maybe if we have time for the Q&A. But I see a lot of engineers, again, avoid making decisions later for the wrong reason. You should defer. You should make decisions just in time. You should make the decisions when you have the most knowledge. Any kind of upfront decision-making that is not consciously business requirements gathering or big upfront design should be deferred to the latest appropriate moment, right? So don't create specs and architecture diagrams and a whole plan for the roadmap just to approve the budget, especially in a product-oriented company. For an agency, yeah, maybe, but again, disclaimer, this talk is probably not for you. So those were the sort of the yin and the yang of what can go wrong on an individual level. Definitely anything on the previous slides, you as an engineer, you as a manager, you as a designer, you as a UX specialist can hold yourself accountable to improving on your own. If for whatever reason you think you need help, it's the team-wide accelerators that allow this problem space, the solution space to this problem, to be diligently joined organization-wide. Maybe that's through your one-on-ones with your manager. If you don't have those, maybe speak to your manager. If you have skip levels with your manager's manager, maybe suggest it there. If you have any tech talks internally, if you have architects, suggest it, try it. This is where experimentation comes in. And if you're afraid of experimenting, then that's probably the main challenge to look for. This is one of my favorite slides. This is basically everything in my toolkit. When I come into a team, this is what we like to focus on. Usually this is what they hire me for, and then I start a workshop or a just-in-time training for TDD, and then everybody's eyes glaze over and everybody tells me, hey, Denis, this is nice, but we have a lot of technical depth. And as a coach, I usually ask them, okay, workshop canceled. Why is it hard? What prevents you from applying this? And that's where we get to the really nitty-gritty stuff. That's what separates out me from a trainer. I go into coaching mode. Because usually, reality is most teams struggle with the fundamentals. They don't have CI/CD. They've been told that following Scrum and Git flow is good. They've been told that they need extensive QA and testing after the fact to inspect quality into the system. But I got news for you. You can't inspect quality into the system. If you haven't built quality into the system, then inspecting it will tell you that it isn't there. And if you want to build it into the system, well, you have to make an intention to do so. See, you can usually, This is funny. In neuroscience, you can spot the latency between action and intention, and intention usually comes first, because you probably had this situation before, where you're about to do something stupid, and you realize you're about to do something stupid, but you can't stop yourself, and you still do it anyway. And this is exactly that moment, because your parasympathetic nervous system catches you. It has low enough latency to notice that this is going on, so it gives you the signal that, hey, you're about to do something stupid. But your prefrontal cortex has too much latency, so even though you know it's about to happen, you don't have the mental clarity to do something about it. This is what we call an impulse. And usually when I see teams not using the rich tools and the knowledge that is available to them in the industry, it's because they are neglecting them by impulse, because they're about to do something stupid. And usually I shadow them and I watch them and I let them do it. And I say, okay, well, why did you do that? Well, I don't think I have enough time to, or there's usually an excuse. Now, the hard part is, I like to think that software engineers are very intelligent people. So if they're not doing it, there's probably a good reason, or at least there's a plausible excuse. And that's what I work on. See, all of you in the audience probably know that you should be using these tools that are here on the list. But all of you might have a good plausible excuse not to. And you might be uncomfortable doing your research into questioning these things, especially if it's not a popular topic at work. That's where I come in, because I help you build that confidence. The tricky part here is that we're all on the same side, and if it was someone's decision to say, hey, we're not going to do this because it always slowed us down, because there's some past evidence that this has never really worked, that, again, is an attachment problem. Remember that slide, the first slide about values? That's really important. Don't be too attached to your past mistakes. Be open-minded for change, because that's why you're on this talk. If you haven't done so yet, maybe set an intention to do something differently tomorrow. Again, not acting on it without intention, because you'll know when you're not serious about it. But again, the title is just to get your attention. You don't need domain-driven design to be domain-driven. But if you're professionals, if you're not hobby developers, if you're professionals, definitely the most important thing you can do is invest into the part of the problem of their solution domain that you're weaker in. So if you have very strong programming skill, well, maybe you need to invest a little bit into understanding the business problem domain. As the quote on the screen says by Jess Watson from Amazon, it's one of their most popular and most quoted papers, is the most important thing is programming skill and deep business awareness for every individual contributor, not the managers, not organizing it by putting it into a silo called the product owner, but everybody. This is what team topologies even now, and the flow conferences have now sort of emerged in tandem with the DORA and the space metrics, is that productivity and well-being are very intimately connected with how well you understand what it is you're building and why it's valuable and how your business makes money off of that. See, when you're building a feature, you should know how much that costs you, how much it will cost you to maintain it, and why the users enjoy using it. And if they're not, what can you do about it? To have that understanding and then to act upon it. And these are usually the combinations that it comes in. You might be very well versed in TDD and refactoring and systems design and security, but you might not be very good in the business part. So you as an engineer can call an engineering meeting to talk about the event model, the business process, to validate business requirements, to validate assumptions, to maybe do DDD together, to get customer feedback, to create forms that produce customer feedback templates, or to look at testimonials together, or watch users, how they react based on some performance tests of like how long the screen takes to load, and definitely what the outcomes of experiments or A/B testing were. If you're on the right side and you like to think about yourself as, oh, I'm not technical, I don't, this is a language I don't speak. Well, then definitely pair with a developer. Shadow a development team or a development pair as they're about to release or as they're about to code review. There's probably a lot you can learn. One of the big successes when we coached is usually getting a product owner or a non-technical business expert into the meeting and having them sort of communicate with the tactical side of the team. It's like, well, why is it named this way if it's some abstract payment something thing, when what it does is set the payment tier? Why isn't it called payment tier? And it's not called payment tier because the team, who is very engineering savvy, never asked. They never understood the ubiquitous language of the business, so they didn't know what the business calls it, what the business domain terminology was, so they gave it a technical name. And if you're doing any kind of vertical slice architecture, hexagonal architecture, or clean architecture, this is a problem you will be commonly facing. You won't know how to name things, so you will name things prefixed with an I for interfaces and impl, if that's the, I hate that with the ports and adapters on the dependency inversion side. But usually there are actually business terminology, nouns or verbs available for that if you just ask the people who are doing this process and you're just modeling what they're doing. And most significantly, I keep talking about high-performing domain-driven teams, but it's not the team that is of high performance. It's not their genetics. It's not their diet. Although it might be how long, how high quality their sleep is. It's definitely a strong factor. High performance is a mode of operation that is available to the team, that is not available if you don't train it. If you take any professional soccer player or if you take any professional tennis player, they will not play full out for playing with their kids or playing a friendly match at home or in the courtyard, because it is a mode of operation. They don't have to be full on blast mode all the time, because that is stressful, and then that leads to burnout. What you want is to understand how you can leverage that 10x mode in your team and when it's appropriate to do so. And sometimes it's even more appropriate to learn as much as possible to make sure we're not building the wrong thing, and then move very fast in that direction together as a team, rather than moving slowly all the time and then sort of trying to move a large ship. And sadly, tools don't help you with that. If you think any kind of AI Kanban tool or Jira or any kind of process management tool that it'll speed you up, I have never seen that promise being delivered on. It's usually the people who come with a intrinsic cadence, a default mode that they want, and they can go one gear faster, one gear slower, and then the team adopts the average of that. And it usually takes one very inspired individual, if that's the leader, so much the better, to uplift the entire team and to make them go faster, to inspire them to go faster, to inspire them to really build that important thing, rather than just following a boring tool or a process imposed to them by a machine or an AI rather than a human, rather than their own principles or core values. So sadly, the way out of if you're in a work environment like this, sadly, the way out is asking tough questions. It's like, why are we doing this? What would go wrong if we change this? To learn how to ask the annoying questions without annoying the person you're asking it of. And that has to do a lot with how you communicate. And soft skills are definitely a huge contributor to this. They're probably one of the most important determining factors for seniors and meteor engineers growing into anything beyond that, or even just increasing their job satisfaction. Is to learning how to communicate benevolently with their coworkers. And that means everybody. The most junior, the most senior, the team lead, the manager, everybody can learn from this. You can learn how to ask stupid questions without annoying people. You can learn how to say no when you're asked to estimate something that is not knowable. That is fine. But often what I see the most is people get asked estimates or roadmaps or silly questions that are not knowable. And then when they say, I don't know, they get bullied into giving them an answer. It's like, no, but I need to know. It's like, no, but I really don't know. I've never done this before. Well, but if you guessed, what would you tell me? And they usually, this is our fault, by the way. We fall under this pressure. And then it's our fault if our estimates that we gave under duress are being used as forecasts. Because when I did life coaching and I explored psychology, especially archetype work, us engineers, we like to be embodying the magician archetype. And what I learned about the magician archetype that I really notched down into my memory as something very important is that when magicians, the craftspeople, the artists, developers, we're very passionate about creating things, and we're technologists because we're curious about everything technology and AI and craft and microservices. When we get backed in the corner, we lie. We don't like uncomfortable situations. So when somebody really, really pushes us for an answer, we will give them an answer that's the wrong one. We know it's the wrong one, assuming it's okay because they forced us to. And that's not okay. That's our responsibility. That's a childish reaction to having a strong defense mechanism that we don't control. So the glue that's usually missing in most books, most literature, is how to combine the tactical things that are easily distracting with the strategic business concerns that you can adopt on an individual and team level. And usually this comes down to fostering more entrepreneurial energies or more entrepreneurial questions. It's like, how can I provide more value? How can I provide more value to my team? How can I provide more value to my boss? You know, what makes my engineering manager be a great engineering manager? How can I help with that? How can I help my engineering manager feel that he's a great engineering manager? And if you're the engineering manager, well, maybe you can ask your VPE, how does my VPE work? Like when does he or she feel successful? You know, those are questions that are worth exploring. And if you aren't having regular one-on-ones with these people, that's definitely the first step. That's the missing glue. It's definitely not gonna jump out of the sky. You're not gonna have an epiphany at a conference. Hiring a trainer and having a workshop definitely won't give you an aha moment. It starts with what you can do and change tomorrow at work. Because that unseen something between strategy and engineering is usually how you communicate. And we like to ignore that because we like to play with our shiny new toys. But the tools only get you so far if you're confident that you head in the right direction. If you're not, that information has to be learned from a human. So, we've done it. We've done the big stuff, the meat, now the dessert. We're just going to recap now, close off, and then we start the Q&A. So to recap, focus on your process. Focus on how you communicate. Make what you're building easy to make. And then build it. You know, tidy first, as Ken Beck's new newsletter is called, or improve incrementally. Just improve it a little bit. The Boy Scout rule. Just leave it. If you touch it, make it 1% better. If quality is an important value, bake that into your process. But definitely work on your process, question your process, improve your process, and then build it. Make sure you head in the right direction. And if you're not, make sure you get the signal that you're not headed the right direction as soon as possible. After a few hours, not weeks. And if you were among that group of people that only wanted the meaty bits, this is the slide with the fox. This is the one you were looking for. This is the recap of everything we discussed so far. And you can check this out later because I'm on a time crunch. Production is telling me to speed up. I have underestimated how much time I need for the stock. See, I'm learning too. So to sign off on this, again, there's no replacement for doing the work. And all models are incorrect models of the world. They're just models. And all approaches are imperfect. The default team does something well that works for them. It might be low stress, but it might be working. And the high-performing team might be high-performing, but maybe then everybody wants to be paid a lot more. Maybe everybody's stressed out. They might want to have more PTO, more time off. They come with drawbacks. It's not better or worse. It's just default versus high performance. It's not for everybody. You don't want to choose the gold medal all the time, every day, every hour. But then if one of them is default and the other one is more benevolent, which team would you like to work on, even if it's for a short time? That's a question for you. I don't need this summary. I don't know why to put this slide here. Or references you can check later. And thank you for joining us today.
Yes, we do. Thanks. It was a really great session. It's been 3 weeks. We had the last one, and I really felt that I'm missing such profound thoughts and talks about technical excellence. So great job, Denis. We enjoyed it. What I liked most is that you mentioned that the best idea is the one which serves the customer, right? And we should be careful not to be attached to the code because code is a liability, not an asset, and our most important task is to make our customers happy, right? And another thing I wanted to bring up about these Tenix developers, and the being Tenix is not about tools, it's about processes, and we really don't need Tenix developers, right? We need to set up Tenix teams with proper processes, as you mentioned. So these are the 2 points I really enjoyed. I don't know, Oliver, if you have something to add to this. Otherwise, I go through the comments, which is only one. So we have time to talk about everything else. I would say that let's go for it. Okay, we have one comment or even more. Let's see, we just one more. So let's go through them, and after that we can see where we end up being at. The first one is from Ilya. When you are working in a big team, more than 2 people, let's say, even if you are decide to do it later, this is not a guarantee that you will work with this feature later when it is needed. So it's not a question, but a thought maybe. What is your take on this? Maybe what is your experience?
I really like Kevin Henney's take on technical depth on this from a recent conference. I believe it was in 2019. It escapes me, but we can probably put it in the show notes. He mentioned basically that technical depth is not something that exists intrinsically in the code, but technical depth is awareness of the technical depth. Right? So if I decide I'm going to use technical depth as a tool, and not only the team, but the business agrees that we will cut corners. Brick and mortar example. When we're the Olympics in Sochi, they built an entire city because it had to be done on the deadline. And the business agreed that, cut corners. Like, it has to be done on the deadline. Cut corners, because we know that afterwards we will abandon the city. So we will just eat the debt, because the profits from hosting the Olympics will way outweigh that. So that is technical debt, let's say, of maybe constructing buildings haphazardly. That is a conscious business decision. The risk with technical debt is when an individual does it without the awareness of the team, or when the engineering department does it without the awareness of the business. Because then if I take on technical debt, I say, well, I know that's risky because I know the debt is there. But if I don't document it, if I got no awareness on it, once I leave the company and somebody else takes over, now there's no technical debt. Now there's an unknown that is not knowable to them, that they will only discover by being exposed to the friction of what they will definitely call a really badly written legacy system. and their defense, and this will usually trigger a immune reaction in the developers. This is the primary immune response that causes developers to leave. That technical debt was taken on but not communicated, because then they got thrown into this sort of inappropriately. And then they have to reverse engineer why this was done this way and what breaks if I touch it. And God forbid if it's not test covered, or if the tests are of low quality, or if the tests are testing implementation and not the behavior, or if they're too integrated or too heavily mocked, or too much on one side. It's never good. So what Ilya is referring to here is the sort of working later mentality, because I do vaguely recall the timestamp the comment appeared. If you decide to do something later, there is no guarantee that you'll ever be getting there. So I wouldn't even put it in the backlog. If you can just say to somebody, hey, who owns this decision? I will remove it. And if you think it's still important a week from now, you add it back. But as far as the team is concerned, I'm getting it off the radar. And if that is technical debt, then it might be useful to document it and then to keep it close to the heart to the team. Because then they should pay it off or deal with it. Or maybe it's planned in a future iteration. Or maybe they are doing an experiment that they'll cut it off anyway, because there's maybe a low chance of success. So again, business nuance is important. But I like the question. So thank you, Ilya. What else?
I love your point about awareness of technical debt. I think there is another point to add is alignment of the team. What is technical debt? Mm-hmm. So the whole team could work in the same direction.
Well, usually, this is, I always, when coaching, I always encourage engineers and especially managers to trust their gut more. You have a huge bundle of nerves in your gut connecting to your spinal column, and that's where most of your intuition comes from. And usually people ask me, and I saw this even on I don't know, it was some female-oriented, female leaders talk show host talking about when do you know it's your intuition and not your ego telling you that message. And her response really surprised me and said, well, when it's your intuition, it feels wrong to ignore. That feeling of I'm about to do something stupid. It's when it's wrong to ignore that you should be perhaps lingering with that feeling a little bit longer and to really question, okay, is this the right thing right now? Is this the best thing we can do right now? And to not go too deep on the decision of, should we do this now? Should we do this later? Should we estimate? Should we even not estimate it? Will we ever get to it? Is to just lower your cognitive load as much as possible.
I really like it that you think everybody's so professional, actually, because that people actually understand what technical debt is and that they now are actually introducing it. Because what I also have seen is that, well, that's good code, right? That's not technical debt. And then they add and add and add, and they only realize it at some point when they cannot add any feature anymore.
Yeah, I mean they can, but and maybe it's even fast, but the team doesn't feel good doing it. They are doing it out of duress, under high cognitive load, high friction, high stress. So maybe the team is delivering on a timely manner, but the 10x path is no longer available to them, and maybe that comparison frame of we're in that corporate loop. We only have slow. And then that comparison frame, maybe that's killing the inspiration. So what I usually test is I send out a questionnaire and it is very easy to test. If you can tell the difference, you can measure it, even if it's a subjective measure. And I usually ask developers, when you deploy something, can you celebrate? And usually the answers that I get back is, well, no, because we're constantly late. So even when we do finish it and it's a success, we don't celebrate because we're late to the party, right? And everybody has left, or nobody's excited about it anymore. Or the excitement, the success was defined as right thing to the right quality then at this date. But then if the date is negotiable, then that creates friction in the interpersonal relationships in the team. Usually it's the deadline that's the most important, and the scope should be negotiated on. Because I have yet to see a business fail because there were 1,400 features and only 1,399 were delivered, and now we're going bankrupt. I have yet to see a situation where all features were crucial to the success of a release, of a launch. That's silly. And we as developers, as professionals, as craftspeople, as Alina likes to call herself, with the gender neutral term, I like it. I do have to admit, I always say craftsman. It's our responsibility to understand, to have empathy with a non-technical person who doesn't understand this, who doesn't know that this is not knowable, and to learn how to communicate with them without being annoying, to push back without being defensive, to say no, and to keep the conversation flowing without closing the door. That's hard.
And how do you get started on that? I mean, you mentioned that now many times, and I really would like to see some concrete example or something.
So what helped me, that is a great question, by the way. What helped me the most is a hiatus and going into life coaching. So not just my own personal development, but also becoming a trainer in life coaching and running my own business as a coach. Because what I had to learn is essentially how to represent myself and think about my product and the outcome that my product serves to my customer. And that really exposed me to the pure form of agile. I'm like, oh, I'm no longer, CV driven. This is no longer CV driven development. I actually need to understand the product of the outcome of my coaching. It is ephemeral, just like software. It's not real. It's not physically tangible. Even if the bits and zeros and ones are sort of on someone's hard drive, the hard drive might be in the matrix as far as I'm concerned, because now it's on the web everywhere and it's abstracted away. So what helped me a lot is definitely books on negotiation and communication. So if you're taking notes, this is the time to take notes. The book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's a bestseller. Very short book. If you don't have the patience to read, very short book. Thinking Fast and Slow, a little bit denser, a bit harder to read, but definitely it covers the science behind Never Split the Difference. And Radical Candor, which covers the sort of more empathy, intuitive side of this whole spectrum. And if you don't like reading, what I can definitely recommend is learn how to speed read. So speed reading is not fast reading. Speed reading is reading with overgeneralizing, but not with your left side of the brain, with the analytical side, but with your intuitive side. It's to scan, like watch the pages like a painting, and to absorb as much knowledge as you can in as little time as possible.
Because you remember emotions anyway only.
Well, no, because but your amygdala and your your reticular activating I'm missing a word, but I didn't prep to have this conversation.
Sorry, getting off topic.
But the point is, the things that matter to you, that are valuable to you, that align with your core values, you don't filter them out. See, if you don't care about cake, you don't know how many cake shops you pass. But if you really want cake, or if you really want ice cream, you notice every single one. They were still there, but they will filter it out. So when you read a book with intention, when you're speed reading, what you really want is, I'm reading this book because I might want to explain it to somebody, or because I really need this for work. So the things that matter to you will pop out. As you're scanning the pages. The important words will pop out, and you will get an intuitive sense. Because people think that speed reading, jumps words. But read one page, close the book, and now recite the page perfectly. Right? Like, you don't have perfect recall. But we think that reading the book slowly will create perfect recall. And we do this mistake, being very left-brained in software teams as well. We think that if we go slow and we understand everything, we will have perfect recall about every single problem that we've encountered, and everybody on the team will have perfect agreement and perfect understanding of what even the root cause was, or what we even should do about it. But I've seen Jira tickets document something important, and then a new Jira ticket supersedes it, and then it's just, well, it was in the ticket, and I linked it in the comment in the pull request in the old ticket on the branch, on the feature branch that got merged, and then somebody modified it and it was the wrong. It's implausible that if you need large amounts of documentation to communicate something important, you should assume it will not be read. So you should learn how to simplify, not how to even I lied. Even I went a bit too far. I had 3 summary slides. It didn't occur to me that was silly, because I said where the important slide was, and the thing I was passionate about was at the beginning. So even I, having full benevolent understanding of my own presentation, I misestimated the value and the candor that it provides.
And it's all right, totally. You have to accept that. And
I'm totally chaotic on this, so
sure.
I needed the push on the private chat to get me to close.
Absolutely. Let's go on to the next one. But the great combos, I enjoyed it. Next one is from Vladi. Let's put it on the screen. Regarding estimates, if we push back providing estimates on the unknowables, this requires a constant replanning and communication with the product, so that once we learn enough, we can provide estimates. So what is your take on this about estimations? When do we do it? I would like to hear your opinion.
Hi, Vladi. So, disclaimer, Vladi is one of my clients. So, thank you, Vladi, for joining us today. Specifically, this question I get a lot. I see a lot of evidence of in startups, especially. And the problem here really is that the engineering team is being empowered, essentially being made responsible to getting correct and really actionable roadmaps, but they are not the one setting the roadmap, right? So there's that's sort of divorced engineering from product symptom, where somebody wants certainty on the roadmap, but the people who know the knowable sides of the roadmap are not building the roadmap when they know the information. They are asked to build the roadmap before they start working on the project, because maybe something else is being optimized, usually a budget, right? So usually a budget is being optimized, or perhaps 2 projects are being done in parallel, and there's talk about maybe splitting the team in half and having like fall scrum, where the team is half and half working on 2 separate sprint goals without them having the autonomy to irk and to steer away from the roadmap. Because usually the replanning and communication that is required, the product team should be reading. In this case, if it's chaotic, this is a sign that you're not delivering a commodity. This is a sign that you're delivering agile, exploratory software, which means that the engineering team is in control. If they're in control, they're the ones that should be running the project. And the product team should be reporting or be integrated, incorporated, pairing, and being collaborative with the team rather than exchanging handoffs. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of, especially formally trained managers or product owners or Scrum certified. Scrum even tells you to do this. The Scrum Alliance and all of the dark certification sort of loops, they tell you to do this in order for them to sell more certifications, to sell you a Scrum Master and a product owner and a project manager and a this and a that and a this and a that, just to keep the silos separate. But really, an engineering team doesn't need Scrum. It doesn't need domain-driven design. So if you want constant communication, sit down with the developers and see what comes up on their whiteboards.
And it all boils down to the fact that early feedback, and that was also one of your
get bad news as soon as possible. So let's say this overly defensive planning wants to avoid bad news late in the project. Well, you can fix this estimation problem with this road mapping problem by planning in that this is the roadmap right now, and every sprint has a checkpoint where we check bad news, and if there is bad news, we will change the roadmap. You just have it there as a as a lever. It's like you can pull on it. It's like that red button. It's like replan. And usually, in typical agile, the idea was that you would do this every day. That is actually what the team is doing. That's where agility comes from. It's like we have a plan, and then tomorrow morning we have a meeting to see if we need to change the plan based on anything somebody on the team learned. But the problem is when traditionally trained managers think that this is a bad thing. That changing the plan often is a sign of incompetence, and then there's this stigma attached to changing your plan often being as a sign of low confidence or uncertainty or imposter syndrome or just not knowing what you're doing. Right, so it's really important to navigate these interpersonal frictions, because maybe the EM and the PO should have one-on-ones where they talk about this, or maybe they should have a skip level with their CTO where they can talk about this. It's like, hey, is this a problem if I keep changing the plan? Like, who cares if I keep changing the plan? Like, why is it bad if we keep changing the plan? Because maybe there isn't a consequence, but nobody asked. All right, so you should keep an open mind and ask.
But changing the plan is usually, I think what they think is when you often iterate and then come up with, oh no, we need also this and also this, then they add actually stories, so the plan gets longer. So they want to have a fixed plan. Let's stick to it because it costs more if we iterate.
Well, the thing is, that's actually what you want, if it's important, right?
Of course.
because yes, it will cost more. But if that's what they want, it's also building an asset that will provide more value.
And you work on the thing with more outcome.
And you get closer to the outcome. See, whenever somebody says, hey, can you hurry up? Because you're working on X, I want you to start on Y. The best thing to do is to stop working on X right now and to start working on Y. Because somebody is communicating to you very actively, hey, the thing you're working on is not as important to me as that other thing that's really urgent that you're not working on. And that is a clear sign of, but it was in this order on the roadmap. Sorry, I think none of us knew last week, so I'm just going to stop working on this. And usually there's no consequences to this. And even maybe throw away what's on the feature branch, if there's a feature branch. And there's usually no consequence to this, but there seems to be some in sort of loss aversion, some mental limbo going on. It's like, no, somebody worked on it and it's important and let's not throw away. But waste gets produced if you know it's not important and you continue on that path, right? So it's not about not knowing what is valuable. The real waste is knowing that it's not valuable and not acting upon that knowledge.
That's the sunk cost fallacy.
It's a sunk cost fallacy, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
again
fine.
about attachment you were talking about before.
Exactly, and that's attachment. Oh, but now I worked on it, and I don't want to derail too much, but I often see developers. We do a kata. I had a TDD workshop yesterday, and today we're doing something new, and we're doing event sourcing or some kata for idempotency, for example. I like doing those, and I see the first thing they write is not a test, and I ask them, hey, I just noticed, we did TDD yesterday. You were super excited about it, but today, when you're writing something like your first thing was code, not that, with implementation, not the test. It's like, oh yeah, right. Oh well, I don't think. Oh, well, I started doing this, and then if I let them, they will continue on that path. But if I have control over the workspace, what I will usually do is, because their excuse is, oh, now I'm already headed this direction. So what I usually do is just, okay, and I delete their code. And, and it's like, is that equivalent of spinning their chair? I headed this direction. Okay, hold on, I spin the chair. And they end up in a different direction. See, if I just spin them away from where they were headed, they might course correct to where they initially wanted to go. Right? So the objection wasn't that my idea was bad. The objection was towards the course correction. Right? So usually it's harder to admit that, oh, I'm not headed the right direction, but it's hard to, turn the wheel. But if you're already facing the wrong direction, if somebody else turns you, then you might actually reorientate towards the thing you want to go, because now you're already forced to change this. And the tax offices work like this as well. It's like, no, we won't bother you with any important information unless you're late, and then we will love to bother you. And then that's usually when most people pay their taxes, right? Because it isn't that it wasn't important. It's just that I was headed down this direction, and I made no intention to do it today. So unless you tell me something important, I won't change my intention. And I think this changing your mind should be taught more and encouraged more in teams. It's like, it's okay to change your mind. Don't stubbornly go, it's like, don't ignore the intuition when it says, well, hold on, we just said this is a bad idea, and you're going to finish the ticket. You said this is the most important thing. You're going to finish the ticket. Just cancel it now. Loss aversion, sunk cost fallacy. Great questions, by the way.
Open-mindedness, yeah.
Open-mindedness, yeah. Don't get attached. The code is the company's. It's debt. It's a liability. Any code written is a liability. Anybody telling you it's an asset, doesn't understand. You should read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah, the people are the asset, right? The most valuable asset of company.
Yes, the team is the asset, exactly.
Yeah.
The going back to the slide, the Amazon quote, right? The asset is taking somebody who is good with technology and, nourishing them with this particular business. That's why a lot of people stay in a certain industry. You start off in e-commerce, you may stay in e-commerce. It's not that your technical ability gets better, but your combination of the industry and the technical ability gets better. It's the combination that makes you a 10x developer, not your technical specialization. Again, there are exceptions. There are specialists who are like really good, they're really good at building compilers, or really good at, just deep C++ understanding, or deep, video encoding understanding. Or maybe they have very good understanding of how transactional systems work, or banks work. Or it's, again, there are rules and exceptions to the rules. I don't want to get too much detail to that, but that's that overlap of what the main-driven design is really about. It's about combining tactical, strategic, engineering, and business understanding, so that you know what the right quality is at the right time, and to build that. And if you know that you're headed the right direction, to act upon it today, not on the retrospective, because then you've already spent all the time you might have had to course correct. But most teams don't do retrospectives, so thankfully they don't. So.
All right. We have 3 minutes left, and we have one more, not a question, but a comment left.
Perfect.
So let's bring it on and let's check it out in the last 3 minutes. It's from Elena. It seems like in a team, people only focus on one thing, either engineering or processes, but forget that both are needed for successful project delivery. We already touched this topic, but what is your 2 cents on this? Or
I think Scrum gets a bad rap for this. When people say, "Oh, there's a sprint goal," which means there's 10 people at one computer mobbing on one goal, and that's not usually, at least in my understanding, what I've witnessed firsthand. That's not the important metric to optimize when we talk about a team. The point of a team is to honor and protect the team's autonomy as a unit. So maybe the team has 7 priorities. Let's say they have. It should be the team that decides how they will tackle each 7. Right? Not that somebody is using the priorities to micromanage individuals within the team, because then the boundary of the team is not honored. And then the accountability of the team is diminished, diluted, by micromanaging and sharing responsibility. That's that sort of engineering and product divorce. When somebody on a managerial role, or maybe just a budgeting role, wants to have certainty, so they really niche it down to an individual developer or individual contributor, or a pair of individual specialists, like a backend and a front-end engineer, and they're sort of planning that. So when it comes to building one thing, the important thing should be, a team should agree on a plan, and that plan is the one thing. The plan might have 7 priorities or 7 things. Again, maybe they are correlated, codependent, maybe there's a little mini waterfall in there that, you know, we have to do this and this and this and this, and then get certified, and then wait, and then maybe run it through some people. But it should be that thing that is the one that then the team autonomously organizes around. It's like, oh, well, I need that specialist for this. Let's do that thing first, and then let's get the specialist online, and then I'll pair with you because I want to learn your specialization. So we diminish the boss factor, and the team self-manages. You know, Vladi asked this question earlier as well. It's like when the team is not allowed to be this autonomous, it's because this management is being done by remotely. Because it is being done by over-planning. It's over-planning availability, over-planning commitment, over-planning who's working on what, who's allowed to work on what. You know, that is usually the first sign of the team not being honored, the team boundary not being honored. And domain-driven design touches upon that briefly, but that would be my main critique of domain-driven design, is that there's a lack of that, the team, because it only talks about the business understanding towards the engineering department. But team topologies handles that very well. It's like the cognitive load of a team should stay within a team, and if it's too much, they should be helped by support domains, platforms, enablers, and sometimes you need a product person who is an enabler. I think that was the original idea with Scrum, is that the product owner has so much work with talking to customers that it would disrupt the teams too much. So they do it instead as sacrifice to enable the team to focus more rather than it being a management position.
Well, these are excellent thoughts to close this session, because unfortunately time is up, but I think all of us would be happy to stay here and chat more about this. So yeah, Denis, what a pleasure. Thank you very much for this great presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations for your performance. We enjoyed a lot. Huge thanks to Alina and Oliver, my friends, to be here as hosts as well. And of course, huge thanks to our audience. We were Technical Excellence. Don't forget that we are available on social media, and of course on Discord we have a community. So feel free to join to us if you have any question about Technical Excellence. So I would say I wish you a great evening further. Thanks for everyone, and see you next time.